Hey milk bars and trips to Mars, welcome to another video. What you're about to watch is actually a section of a much larger conversation between myself and my good friend Justin Koo, aka That Christian Vlogger. We both read Francis Chan's latest book, Letters to the Church, and we had a long-form, almost 3-hour discussion on it, half of which is being released on this channel, the other half is being released week by week on his channel. So make sure you go and subscribe to Justin's channel. It's That Christian Vlogger. It is linked below. You're about to watch one section of that conversation. If you want to see the full conversation, that was actually released only to our Patreon supporters. So if you would like to support me, you'd like to support Justin and our ministries on Patreon, you can do that through the link in the description as well. But as for right now, we hope that you enjoy this clip of Letters to the Church, a discussion between myself and Justin Koo, aka That Christian Vlogger. All right, so chapter 2 of Francis Chan's Letters to the Church is entitled Sacred. And this chapter, in this chapter, Chan reminds us that the church and the things of God that we often treat or fall into the trap of treating them as common or just another part of life are actually extremely sacred, whether that be God's word or prayer, and especially what this book is talking about, the church. And this chapter was convicting for me in a unique way in that it brought me even outside of thinking about just the church into thinking about every single aspect of my faith and how I approach it, and perhaps how I have come to approach it with just sort of this everyday or common or pedestrian way of doing things. And I think for me that always comes out of an effort to, especially when I'm teaching or when I'm making a video, I want to make God and his word as approachable as I can for people. I want to remove this stigma that it's only for people with master's degrees in theology, or it's only for people who have been doing this their whole lives. But I think sometimes out of a desire to make it more approachable, we lose the sacredness. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Dude, I completely agree with that. A series of meetings that I spoke in California a number of years ago, actually the same series of meetings that I ended up meeting my wife at. But I was really attempting to do this. I'm not trying to say that I did this right or that this is the way to do it, but I was struggling with this. How do I make God relatable and seem personable, and the things of faith and Christianity applicable to every single day life? And so I tried to open up every single message with like a joke or some kind of like silly limerick or something along those lines. But then going through this passage, I could totally see how you'd struggle with this. Is like, how do I know when it's sacred and when it's like common? And is it wrong for it to be both or is it only one or the other? Because one of the major criticisms that I've experienced for church for myself, and I've heard many young people say the same thing as well, it's like church seems like so distant, so foreign. And I think that the whole incarnation story is that that's not what God wanted to do. Jesus came in and became flesh and walked amongst us to show that like he is, in a very real sense, like one of us. And there's that relatability. He no longer calls us servants but friends. But then again, God is God and he's wholly other.
He's also Lord as much as he is my best friend who's walking beside me,
right?
You know, which it's sort of hard to draw that line. And for me right now, like I am a part of a church and being mentored as a communicator by a pastor who's very, very passionate about removing any sort of like Christianese language or any of this like flowery stuff that we put on top of it. I'll get on stage and I'll say something as much as like doing life together. And he's like, what does that mean?
Right.
What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. He's very, very passionate about, you know, if you're going to use a phrase on stage, and this is something Tim Keller talks about in his book on preaching, if you are going to use a phrase on stage that the average, normal, everyday person would not understand, you better define it, or you are communicating to that person that doesn't understand it. You're on the outside and we're on the inside.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's that whole divide of us versus them, that we're better than you mentality, we're holier than thou kind of approach that I think we have really inherited from previous generations and is really setting us back as far as being able to share the gospel with people. There's so much power in the truth that we're just like you. We're just as broken and searching, but the difference is that we found Jesus, and this has made the difference. And so how do you communicate that relatability, that commonness without distancing yourself? That's the challenge.
And it's almost like the problem is when we treat ourselves and our man-made practices as sacred rather than treating God and his word and his commands as sacred. Right. Almost like we're almost too precious about our Christian way of doing things, and we are not holding and lifting up what God is actually calling us as the church to do, which is kind of the whole point, I think, of Chan's book. So we've sort of already been talking about this, but I'll phrase it in the form of a question. What do you think is the balance then? How do we walk this line between sacred reverence and openness and relatability in terms of being the church, which is a Christianese phrase that I shouldn't have used.
Being the church.
In terms of living within the church.
That's such a good question. I think a large part of it probably comes to viewing ourselves and viewing people in the same way that God views them. We're not looking down at people or looking up at people. I think there's one part in this chapter where he's talking about like the temple that's being built in the Old Testament in like 2 Chronicles. Like there's this temple being built, fire comes down from heaven, the glory fills the entire temple, and then God's there, and it's like this massive monumental moment. He talks about, would you ever then go with like a sledgehammer and start like hitting at the wall and destroying the wall? Like, obviously not. You would never do that. And yet when it comes to looking at the church as far as the building and the institution in America, or just really what it's supposed to be, each other, myself or you, like we're so quick to put each other down and to devalue ourselves. And so maybe part of it is realizing that we're not just interacting with average Joes on the street. Maybe part of it is realizing that I'm interacting with someone who bears the imprint of the divine, who carries the Imago Dei. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I sort of thought about is the more I've reflected on this, the more I realized that I was equating sacred with old language.
The these and the thous and the thines.
Yeah. As though in order to treat God as sacred, I need to use heightened Old English in my prayers, when that's actually not what sacred is. I was thinking about the things in our lives that we often treat as sacred. And I think the more I thought about it, I was like, really, we treat like our favorite book of all time, we treat it as sacred. Like the way we put it on our shelf, we put it. You have all your other books facing with the spine out, and your favorite one has the cover out because you love being reminded of it. The way we talk about it, it's talked about with a reverence and a love, and also an experience of hearkening back to the feelings and the relationship that you have with that television show or with that movie or with that book. And I think for me, that's how I would define this way of treating the church and treating God's word as sacred, the way that Chan is talking about. It's a relationship that has been cultivated over time as you've spent time with God, as you have placed him in a special place on your shelf or in your heart.
So what does that look like lived out? As we are the church, and the way that we treat each other is the natural extension of that church. What does it look like treating the church as sacred in that respect?
I think part of it for me, and this is a change that has started with the current church that my wife and I are a part of, is when we talk about it. We've had friends tell us, like, I can't wait to come visit your church just because of the way you guys talk about it. And when I and beyond that, when I show up there on Sunday morning, and we'll perhaps talk about this later in a chapter that's coming up, when I show up there on Sunday morning, I want to make sure that every person who walks in that door feels welcomed, feels loved, and has a great experience. When I walk into those doors, I want to be the absolute best version of who God created me to be. I don't walk into those doors, whether it's on Sunday or throughout the week, lightly.
Yeah.
I walk in with a weight of responsibility on my shoulders.
I'm so guilty of not doing that. Especially lately. I'm a very cynical and sarcastic kind of a person. I'm more quickly to talk about something in that tone than like love and cherishing and all that kind of stuff. And I know for me in the past, especially in the last couple of years, because I've been struggling with my relationship with the church and trying to understand, really, is this what God has called us to? And I'm feeling like frustrated about that. I know that a lot of times in my conversations with people and even like just what I post online can come across as very cynical, very critical of the church. And I admire the language in which you talk about your church and your people and your community, so that people respond like, wow, then this really is amazing. And I think that if Jesus were to talk about his church today, even if it was the kind of church that still has struggles and problems, like he's going to talk about it it has a special place in his heart. He's going to talk about it from a place of, I love this place. This is my church, even if they're not doing everything all the best ways that they could be.
Yes, but Jesus also does that from a place of anger and frustration from time to time. I think perhaps your at best your struggle with the church and these thoughts and frustrations you have with it perhaps are flowing from a view of, no, this thing is sacred, and I just see a lot of people doing it wrong or not treating it as such. Just because something is sacred doesn't mean you're always speaking well of it.
Wow.
That thing is sacred, yes, but if someone is treating that sacred thing in the wrong way, that's going to cause some very, very that's going to cause emotions like anger and frustration, and it's this sense of injustice. And so I think the fact that you're feeling that way doesn't mean you don't view the church as sacred. It just perhaps means you see other people not treating it as such.
Wow. That's good. That's a word. I'm reflecting on this. I'm trying to say, obviously it makes me feel better that I'm not completely just out there being crazy. But in the book of Revelation, the first couple chapters are literally letters to the, I think that, I'm assuming that's where he got this whole title, letters to the church, was out of that theme in Revelation. It's not all good stuff. Like, there are some hard words there. And so I appreciate that, because deep down with my frustrations, I do love the church. My whole life is built around community and serving God and trying to build up the kingdom, whether that's through social media or in person or something like that. So like deep down there, that's what motivates everything that I do. And it is good to know that when there's frustrations, that might actually be a sign of my love for the church. Like, that's refreshing to reflect on. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Of course. I don't know, thank you for this conversation, because I think it has helped me sort of clarify my thinking around not only what is sacred, but how do we walk that line, which I think is so important if we want the church to grow, and if we want the church and a relationship with God to not be this old stuffy thing or this incredibly intimidating thing for people, which it is, because even people who haven't grown up in the church show up at the church with baggage and with an idea of what it's supposed to be. So I'm grateful for this conversation.
Me too,
this conversation has been sacred to me.
I feel the same way.
Hey friends, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this discussion, once again, head on over to Justin's channel, That Christian Vlogger. You'll find all of the odd chapter discussions on his channel. You'll find all the even chapter discussions right here. If you want to watch it all uninterrupted, you can just become a supporter of both of our Patreon pages. It is a great way for you to support the ministry that we are doing, help these ministries continue to grow, and you get to watch our whole almost 3-hour discussion of the book. You can watch that completely unedited, all put together. In the meantime, thank you all once again for watching. We'll see you next time on another video. I love you all. Keep being awesome.